I am here with Simon Western today. And Simon, I want to welcome you to this lightning conversation. How are you?
I'm great, Si. Good to be with you.
Likewise, it's great to be with you, my friend. I would love for you to kind of share a little bit about who you are, and then we can get into the narrative of the conference that's coming up and the themes and explore your thinking all around.
Who I am is a long story, but I'll try and make it brief. I left school early, got thrown out of school. I worked in a factory. I became a nurse, a general nurse, a psychiatric nurse, a psychotherapist, a family therapist. So all my work's been very interested in people. And then I got kind of interested in kind of wider systems of healthcare and social care I was working in. Didn't work. So I educated myself. I did a couple of master's degrees, and then I went on to do a doctorate, PhD at Lancaster Business School on leadership. And I got very interested in leadership, and particularly my energy is around the unconscious, the psychodynamics of leadership. I'm trained in psychoanalysis, and that's a big part of my work. That's one aspect, this depth approach, linked very much with a network approach. So how we kind of work in the digital age, the technology age, the environmental crisis, all these kind of wider, bigger social systems are part of the work. So it's bringing the depth and the network together. That's kind of my work. And I run a company now called Analytic Network Coaching, which is about doing the analysis and bringing it to the network. That's what we're about.
Wonderful, Simon. Wonderful. So especially in this time of crisis in the world in which we're advancing into even more than ever, your work is needed. Can you share with us more about eco-leadership and what it all means in today's reality?
Yeah, so in my doctorate PhD, I did research on leadership, and my supervisor said, read leadership. So I read leadership over the past 100 years, and I came up with 4 discourses of leadership which have occurred over the last 100 years, and they're still very present with us today. So the first was controller leadership. This is about the industrial age, the machine kind of age, and how people think about kind of controlling resources. And the thinking behind controller leadership is science and efficiency. You apply science and rationality to make things as efficient as you can to get kind of hyper productivity. That kind of went into the waned a bit after the Second World War, when people demanded a more kind of humanistic approach to kind of being led. They got fed up with the old ways, and it's actually coming back now because of the digital age. So we now have kind of algorithmic management. We have gig economies. We have people kind of being managed by technology these days. I call it kind of a management by numbers. So controller leadership's kind of was the first discourse. And just to say that these discourses are not right or wrong, and they're all necessary. Mm-hmm. So we need controller leadership. We need to control our resources. We need to kind of be on top of some basic numbers. We need to understand data, etc. So it's not right or wrong, but there's a shadow side. So the shadow side of controller leadership is dehumanization. Mm-hmm. Machines take over. The second phase of leadership, the discourse, was the therapist discourse, and that came about post-war, the human relations movement. Maslow, psychologists, they entered the workplace, and it was all about rather controlling employees, motivating employees. So therapist leadership is very strong today, still needed. Its real strengths are, it's all about people. It's about kind of acknowledging how people kind of get motivated, how they work together. So there's a huge science behind that. Very, very important, big part of the work. Its shadow side and limitations are that people just focus mainly on the individual and a small group and the team. They don't see the big picture, what's going on. So that was a challenge. And that led to the third discourse, which is the Messiah discourse. And that came about in the 1980s when the US and the West went into a big economic slump. They were using the therapist discourse. They were applying all these methods to kind of motivate people. They took their eye off the big picture, and suddenly the Asia Tiger economies were kind of outmaneuvering them. So you had Toyota, you had kind of Fujitsu, you had the Japanese economies outperforming American car companies, etc. And the big question was, how are they doing it? And the answer came, they went to study the Asian ways, and it was about culture control. These societies kind of have a very different way of thinking about kind of collective cultures. And they really embraced kind of the workers at all levels of the organization, and they engaged them in quality circles and in Kaizen approaches. And this got transported back into the US, but they couldn't apply the same collective cultures onto the US. So they decided to create transformational leaders and Messiah leaders. So these leaders kind of, they set out a vision, they set out kind of the vision of the company, and people kind of went to work for Steve Jobs because they love Steve Jobs, the charismatic leader, and they love that company. They're going to change the world. So you kind of brought your soul to work, and this way of motivating people, very powerful, very important. We need clear visions. We need strong cultures. The shadow side, of course, is when these cultures get too strong, they become cult-like cultures. This is what Peterson Wortman said. This is what we need, cult-like cultures. You know, clearly, I disagree. I don't think we need cult-like cultures because it creates conformist organizations, and people really, it doesn't allow any dissent or diversity or creativity in the end. And then, so that was the first three: controller, therapist, Messiah, and they're all with us, all in the mix. And then at the turn of the century, the internet age, the digital age, we got the what I call the eco-leadership discourse. And I initially kind of wrote about this as a discourse, thinking about kind of the network society in which we live in. We live in a network society, a technological society, a network society, and we had to kind of apply new thinking to this society. And also we had to pay attention not just to the technological revolution, but also to the environmental crisis we were facing. Now, these systems can no longer be ignored, so we had to pay attention to them. So that was about the eco-leadership discourse, and I've been really working on that, and rather than just kind of commenting on as a discourse, developing a theory and practice of eco-leadership. And I work with major companies across the world now, delivering eco-leadership. And that's all about making their internal organizations more participative, distributing leadership widely, leadership from the edges, to make them more adaptive. Also to pay attention to the external ecosystems, technological changes, the environmental crisis, how we adapt to that, and really being driven by social purpose rather than just for profit.
Fantastic. Simon, a few things that I have found extremely powerful about your work is one is you look at these as discourses. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, and you beautifully started with it, is it's not exclusive. They're all needed. They're all necessary. Can you say a little bit more about both the dialogue, the discourse, the discourse aspect, as well as the integration, especially in a time that we live today?
Yeah, so the discourse is, because I'm interested in psychoanalysis and the unconscious, I was very drawn to Foucault's work in discourse analysis. And that really says that we have a social unconscious kind of way of thinking about things. So like in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, the social unconscious around gay culture, for example, it was illegal, and people kind of made the basic assumption. There was a discourse which said being kind of homosexual was wrong, it was bad. There's marginal voices fighting that, but they're very marginal. The major discourse said this is wrong, and the normal thing is heterosexuality. Now that discourse has changed. Mm-hmm. It's the same in leadership. We have assumptions that leadership's individual. We have assumptions that it's about charismatic people. It's assumptions that it's about people in power. But actually, I'm trying to subvert that discourse. So and people kind of think that is normal. That's a normative, taken for granted way of thinking. You know, tell me a good leader, Mahatma Gandhi, and is a charismatic individual. And we're trying to, eco-leadership says, let's kind of rethink leadership. Let's change the way of thinking. So we get trapped in ways of thinking, and we have to, and discourse is trapped in ways of thinking. So we're trying to kind of untrap people. And in this moment in time, it's absolutely vital with COVID. COVID is like an amplification of what was going on before. So I've been teaching eco-leadership for 10 years, working with companies, and it's the same issues, but amplified. It's like COVID is something gone viral. It's about networks. It's about human and technological networks coming together. It's about kind of the marketplace. It's about how much flight and travel we do. It's the whole thing together creates kind of a network which allowed the pandemic to take place. And I've written quite extensively on that. And we have to take up an eco-leadership kind of position, but that doesn't mean saying get rid of all the other discourses. It says, where do we need to kind of put control in here? And we do. We have to really think about how we control. You know, we have to have a lockdown at a certain stage, and we have to be more open. You know, it's really, really important. How do we kind of get people on side? How can we mobilize people? You need therapist leadership. You definitely kind of need it to get people kind of to be cohesive around fighting this thing. but also it all comes under the umbrella of what I call the meta discourse, which is eco-leadership. You have to think about the kind of wider systems, the wider networks, the systems beyond just the workplaces, which we live and engage with. And if you don't do that, then you're on a loser. We have to kind of pay attention to that. So these other ways of leading are vitally important. The eco-leadership discourse says pay attention to which is most important at any given time, in any given context, and always think about the patterns of systemic kind of impacts.
Wonderful, Simon. Wonderful. So, Simon, I love the way you're describing it. COVID is really a catalyst, if you will, for all the things that are happening now to us to really bring these things forward. As you look at the world, perhaps what are the top 3 sort of perspective aspect or recommendations that you really would wish the world would hear and kind of really embrace?
Well, when I read about COVID and I talked about we have to really pay attention that we live in a precarious, connected, interdependent time. And that applies to COVID, it applies to viruses, it applies to the ecosystems, it applies to technological disruption, it applies to social inequity as well. Any of those things, if we take a day off the ball on those things, we're going to face very, very troubled times. So they're the 3 things really. It's about understanding that we in the 20th century we were quite omnipotent. We believed that kind of we could control nature, or we could build society just the way we wanted it. We could not pay attention to the kind of the social things which are impoverishing people. We have to now, and if we don't, we're in big trouble. So that's the area where I'm working with. And if you want a successful organization, whether you're a non-profit, whether you're a tech company, whether you're a retail company, eco-leadership still applies. You still have to be more engaged with your customers, with your workers, and participative organizations does that. So it's not kind of us versus them. It's really about, if you're a business, if you're a school, if you're a hospital, if you're running a politician or country, you still need to apply those same theory and the practices.
Very well said. So if nothing else, COVID has humbled us to embrace the holistic aspects that you bring forward. That's very powerful, Simon.
I hope so. And it's a massive opportunity, but there will be a battle. There'll be a struggle because some people say, well, we can't, if we just got to get growth back in the economy as quick as we can, and they're trying to go back to the old ways as quick as we can. But there's a huge opportunity to kind of really think about how interconnected we are now, and we have to think in a more eco-leadership way. Yeah.
So in many ways, sort of redefine what normal really means, and definitely part of the conversation that's happening out in the space at this point.
I think so. I mean, I think normal before COVID was actually abnormal. We were going down a cul-de-sac, and we knew it, but we turned a blind eye to it. COVID's kind of brought that conversation right back into the foreground again, and hopefully we can address those big questions.
Wonderful. I really want to respect your time. Thank you so much, Simon. I'm hoping that you will definitely give us more time in the future where we can dive a lot deeper. But thank you so much, Simon.
That'd be good. It's been a great conversation. Thanks very much, Si. Take care.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you very much.